What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Smash JT. And this episode is going to be a little bit different than what I typically do because I got a question for you. This has been popping up a few different places online recently, and it got me thinking. How much will the next generation of video games cost for the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox 2, or whatever it ends up being called? Will it still be the standard $59.99 MSRP that we're all used to? Or is it going to change? Smash JT. I asked a question on Twitter earlier today wondering if you guys would be okay with spending more money on video games for the next generation of consoles, to which a resounding number of you said, no, definitely not. I do not want to be spending more than $60 on a video game USD. And I get that. I do. I totally understand where people are coming from because the way games are being built today, filled with microtransactions and DLC and extra content you can buy and nickel and diming you to death. But what if I were to propose to you that that model of games were to go away with the next generation of console games? Not completely. Like, free-to-play games will still be there. They'll always be there, and they'll get the low-hanging fruit, the people that don't understand what even gaming is and don't understand that spending money on a game gives you an experience that you enjoy. So, yes, Fortnite is never going away. Those type of Apex Legends and the multiplayer games and group campaigns, battle royales, they're never going anywhere. They are a new business model in themselves that is extremely successful. But as far as the traditional model of single-player games, more specifically action-adventure, even into RPG, JRPG games, where it's single-player focused, where you buy the game to experience an amazing, epic adventure that you just can't believe. It's so much fun and so entertaining, and you don't need all this extra DLC and microtransactions to enjoy the experience. What would you be willing to pay for that? And do you think game companies would take the chance, it's a big risk by the way, to raise the price from, we'll say $59.99 USD MSRP to $79.99 USD, where it's $80 for a video game plus tax? I mean, you get into the point of almost $100 for a video game, one single video game. Can you justify that, and would it be worth it to you? Because I feel like if some companies were able to do that and pull it off, it could spark an entirely new business model. Now, I know I sound kind of crazy here, but let me put this in perspective in the way that I'm thinking about it the best I can. Is there a game out there that you would pay whatever it costs to play it? Like, think about it. What your favorite game is, what you're most excited about, what you can't wait to come out. For me personally, it's Link's Awakening on the Switch. What would you be willing to pay for that? Because if you're willing to pay more than $59.99, that means you're okay with the model rising in price. For me personally, I would be willing to pay more than $60 for Link's Awakening. I'd be willing to pay more than $80 for it. I'd be willing to pay $100 for it. And it's probably not going to be worth that, honestly. I mean, it's a video game at the end of the day, but I'm just putting my bias in with this, just full disclosure. That's how much I want to play that game. That's how excited I am for it, and that's how much I know Nintendo is not going to fail me when it comes to making an enjoyable experience. Now, that is just my perspective, but I'm asking you from your perspective, what game is out there that you would possibly pay more for? And if that's the case, then that might mean, yes, you are okay with more than $60 per video game in the future, if it's justified. Now, like I said, this all goes back to free-to-play is still going to be there, and you'll always be able to spend money on microtransactions needlessly, but for those of us that want the full engrossing single-player campaign mode that has a complete game when you buy it, with not really any updates or anything needed added on to it. Yes, DLC would always be welcome if that were the case. I mean, think of a game like Chrono Trigger back in the day. I would have paid $200 for that game. I was so hyped for it. Secret of Mana, I would have paid $150, $200 for that game too. Those games were epic experiences that were worth every cent. So think about it. If a game company is to pour their heart and soul into making a game as spectacular as possible, and you see the previews for it, you're getting hyped for it, you might spend more than $60 for it. I'm just saying. Now, if that were the case, this kind of bridges into another discussion, which I want to talk about in this video as well, is if game prices do rise in the next generation of consoles, if they start going up to $80, $90, $100, what do you think that means for the retro video game market? Will that be rising prices of the NES, Super Nintendo, Genesis, and all those old retro systems? Would those start going up in value because the cost of games has risen on the new era? That it's cheaper to game retro, more people would go towards retro games, and because there'd be more demand for it, the supply would go less, which means the prices would go up. It's an angle I hadn't really considered in the past, but it's something that could completely change the entire retro video game market as we know it from something that totally doesn't really necessarily directly correlate to it, and that is new games rising in price. If you've ever heard the expression, rising tide raises all ships, it's an investment point, which basically means if one industry starts rising, every company in that industry starts going up in value. It could mean the same for video games on the whole. If you consider most games have collector's editions and Game of the Year editions and other things attached to them, raising the value of them in general, most of the time games end up costing more than $60 these days anyways. So with that in mind, I could totally see a justified price increase in the next generation of consoles, a premium, maybe even a test market to see how it works out at start when they launch these consoles to see how many people would be on board with spending that kind of money. Think about Halo Infinite. Think about Last of Us 2. Think about major titles from gigantic publishers. If you would be willing to spend more than $60 on these games. Get your mind out of the Fortnite gutter, get your mind out of these free-to-play games, and start thinking about these full-on experiences from these major publishers. Would it be worth it to you? Would you spend more? And if you're willing to spend more, how much more would you be willing to spend? The other side to this coin is, if these games start costing $80, $90, $100, is that going to start pricing people out of gaming? Is it going to start getting so expensive for the hobby that less people are going to game? Which is a serious concern. You got to be very careful with the audience that you're selling these games to. It's very finicky, and there's a lot of supply of older games out there that are absolutely excellent. So if you're going to be spending more money on newer titles, they're going to have to be that much better than the games that are already currently available. Because even though most people will say, I've already played all those games that are out, I want to play the new games, and I am willing to spend more money on them, truth is you haven't played all those old games. That's what's called a backlog, and anybody who's a gamer has a gigantic one of those. And if you're not a gamer and you think you've played all the games, all you need to do is a little bit of research to find out that there are hundreds of 10 out of 10 games out there that you probably have not played. And with that being said, you can get those at a fraction of the price for what a PS5 and Xbox 2 game would cost, assuming that the prices went up. Something to consider. Something that these game companies need to consider. Because they effectively are competing against their older products. That's why they're trying to get rid of the used games. That's why they're trying to go digital. Because if they can do that, they can set the prices at whatever they want. Used games is what is screwing them from trying to raise the prices currently, because used games are available in plentiful supply at a much lower price. So something to consider again from the publisher's standpoint, if it's going to be worth it making a new game, raising the price of it to compete against awesome games that are already available in someone's backlog. It might be a reason why some people might not make the leap to the next generation and finally start getting around to playing games in their backlog. Gaming is changing. It's changing faster than anybody could possibly keep up with. And while the microtransactions-based games are extremely successful, and while a ton of these free-to-play models are working, the loot boxes, the microtransactions, and all these other DLCs and ways they're taking money out of the consumer are working fantastic, I don't think it's going to stay forever. I feel like games will go back to a model of being complete for people to play them. Now, why is that? Honestly, it comes down to the vast majority of gamers are getting fed up with buying these half-baked games. Look at games like Anthem, or Fallout 76, or Mass Effect Andromeda, or a slew of hundreds of other games out there that come out and are not complete. No Man's Sky, Destiny, other games that actually eventually turned out alright, but initially we're lacking a ton of content. People are starting to get upset about that. They're starting to speak with their wallets, and Anthem is the definition of that, where it didn't sell anywhere close to the expectations of what EA was hoping for, and that's because consumers are starting to take notice. It's leaning much more towards a situation where game publishers can't fake it till they make it. They have to actually produce high quality content in order to sell the game. Yes, there will always be some exceptions to that. Yes, there will be fads that come and go. But for the most part, looking at these AAA publishers, they can't fake it anymore. They have to work much harder to get those sales. There's a lot to talk about and dissect with this, but ultimately what it comes down to is, are you okay with spending more than $60 on a complete, full experience that's not riddled with microtransactions in the next generation of consoles? If you consider the influence of YouTubers, game sites, so many social media blitzes out there that let people know what's going on and informing the consumer that this game is worth it, it could sway public opinion into spending more money on games because they are deemed valued. They are deemed worth it. It's a very interesting topic, and I really wanted to hear what you guys have to say about it. That's where I'm going to leave this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, you stay smashing.